There is a moment, and you know exactly which one I am talking about, when you look at your phone, see the notification of a social event, and feel something strange move through your chest. Not excitement, not dread, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that feels almost like relief when you decide, again, not to go. You close the app, you set the phone face down on the table, and in the silence that follows, there is a version of you that exhales for the first time all day. If that moment is familiar to you, then this is for you. Not as a diagnosis, not as a warning, but as a conversation that is long overdue, between someone who has spent years wondering why they are the way they are, and a perspective that finally says, you are not broken. You were never broken. You were a child who did something extraordinary to survive, and that child is still running the same code, still protecting you, still doing the only job they were ever taught to do, and it has cost you, hasn't it? Not in ways that are easy to explain. Not in ways that make sense at dinner parties, which of course you are not attending. It has cost you in the currency of unexplained distance, unreturned calls, relationships that dried up slowly like rivers in a quiet drought, while you watched from the bank and told yourself this was fine, that you were fine, that you preferred it this way. Maybe you do prefer it this way. Maybe you do prefer it. But preference and survival are not always the same thing, and tonight we are going to sit with that distinction for a while. There is a specific kind of person who disappears from social life, and I want to be precise about who I am describing, because this is not about introversion as a personality quirk. It is not about shyness or social anxiety in the clinical, trembling sense. The person I am describing was not always distant. There was a time, and you may have to reach back quite far to find it, when they were present, available, maybe even the emotional center of the room, the one people leaned on, the one who listened, the one who remembered everyone's problems and somehow never seemed to have any of their own. That was not a gift. That was a role that was assigned to you before you were old enough to understand that roles could be refused. Psychologists have a name for what happens to a child who is required to function as an emotional adult before their own emotional development is complete. They call it parentification. Not in the dramatic clinical sense that people often imagine. It does not require obvious neglect or visible abuse. Parentification happens in ordinary homes, in loving families, in places where the parents were simply overwhelmed or absent in ways that had nothing to do with physical presence. It happens when a child learns through 1,000 small and unspoken signals that the adults around them are not stable enough to hold the weight of the child's needs, and so the child does the only logical thing available to them. They stop having needs. Or more precisely, they learn to hide them so efficiently that eventually, even the child forgets where they put them. This is what the researchers call pseudo-maturity. It is maturity in appearance only, maturity as performance, as protective architecture. The child learns to read rooms before they can read books. They learn to manage moods, to de-escalate tension, to be the calm presence in a sea of adult volatility. They become in ways that are genuinely impressive, extraordinary, and everyone praises them for it. Everyone says, look how mature this child is, look how responsible, look how they never cause trouble, and the child learns the lesson embedded in that praise. The lesson is, your acceptability is conditional on your functionality. Your love is earned through service. Your presence is tolerated because of what you provide. It is not maturity, it is survival wearing maturity's clothes. And here is what happens to that child when they grow up. They find themselves in adult relationships, in friendships and partnerships and workplaces. And the same code runs. Be useful, be available, manage the atmosphere, do not burden anyone, do not take up too much space, do not under any circumstances be a problem. And for a while they do this. They do it brilliantly. They are the friend who always shows up, the colleague who always delivers, the partner who always holds things together. They pour and they pour and they pour, until one day they simply stop showing up. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with an explanation that anyone would find satisfying. They just quietly, over a period of months or sometimes years, withdraw. They stop initiating. They stop responding as quickly. They let the silence stretch, and when no one reaches back through it, they note this carefully and withdraw a little further. People call this coldness. They call it rudeness or selfishness or that vague accusation of having changed. But from the inside, it does not feel like any of those things. From the inside, it feels like finally being allowed to put down something very heavy that you have been carrying for a very long time. To understand why the nervous system makes this choice, we need to talk about a framework that fundamentally changed the way we understand human behavior and relationship. The polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges, describes the way our autonomic nervous system is constantly below the level of conscious thought, scanning the environment for signals of safety and threat. This scanning is called neuroception, and it is happening in you right now, as it has been happening every moment of your life. The theory describes three states that the nervous system moves between. The first is the ventral vagal state, which is the state of genuine social engagement, the state where connection feels possible and safe, where you can make eye contact and listen and be heard and feel neither overwhelmed nor numb. The second is the sympathetic state, the state of mobilization, fight or flight, the state where the body prepares to defend or escape. And the third is the dorsal vagal state, the most ancient of the three, the state of shutdown, of collapse, of profound withdrawal from the world. Now here is what matters for the person we are describing. When you spend your childhood in an environment that is emotionally unpredictable, where connection consistently comes with a cost, where being seen means being used, where being present means being responsible for everyone else's emotional weather, your nervous system learns something. It learns that social engagement, the very thing it was designed to seek, is not safe, that other people are not sources of ventral vagal regulation, they are sources of demand, they are dysregulating. They are, in the language of the body, threats.
And so the system adapts. It learns to find regulation elsewhere, in the quiet of an empty room, in the predictable company of books or music, or long walks taken alone, in the profound cellular relief of not having to manage anyone else's experience for a few hours. This is not pathology, this is intelligence. This is your nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do, using the information available to it, protecting you with the only tools it was given.
The problem is that the nervous system is not a perfect historian. It learned its lessons in the past, but it applies them indiscriminately in the present. The colleague who wants to have lunch is not your emotionally unstable parent. The friend who asks how you are doing is not setting a trap, but the body does not always know this. The body feels the approach of another person's need, and somewhere in the architecture of its learned experience, it begins to prepare, to manage, to perform. And the exhaustion of that preparation, the sheer metabolic cost of bracing for a connection that history has taught you will ask more than it gives, becomes over time unsustainable, and so you disappear. Not because you are cold, not because you do not care, but because caring has never, not once in your formative experience, been free. There is another layer to this that deserves careful attention because it speaks directly to the identity that tends to form around this kind of history. Psychologists describe a pattern called hyperindependence, and if you have never heard the term but recognize the experience, you will feel something loosen in your chest when I describe it. Hyperindependence is not confidence. It is not strength in the way we usually mean the word. It is the profound and deeply held conviction that needing other people is dangerous, that dependence is a form of vulnerability that the world will eventually exploit, that the only truly safe pair of hands are your own. It is the reason you research everything before asking for help and then usually don't ask. It is the reason you say you're fine even when you are spectacularly not fine. It is the reason you have built systems and routines and carefully maintain self-sufficiency that impresses everyone around you, but that you privately know is less about capability and more about never ever being in a position where someone else's reliability is the variable your survival depends on. Because you learned, early and thoroughly, what happens when you depend on someone who cannot hold you. You learned to hold yourself, and you are extraordinary at it, and it is exhausting, and it is lonely, in a way that is different from the loneliness of someone who wants company and cannot find it. It is the loneliness of someone who has company available, who has people who would genuinely show up, and who still on some frequency below conscious thought cannot quite bring themselves to believe it. This is the place where we need to make a distinction that I think will change the way you understand your own story. The distinction between solitude and loneliness. These two words are often used as synonyms, or as points on the same spectrum, as if solitude is just loneliness that has been dressed up and made to seem intentional, but they are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. They are in fact nearly opposites. Loneliness is the experience of absence. It is the awareness of a gap between the connection you have and the connection you need. It is painful because it is defined by what is missing, by the hollow where something was supposed to be. Solitude is the experience of presence. It is the fullness of being with yourself, fully, without the static of performance or the background hum of managing another person's needs. It is not an absence of others, it is a presence of self, The person who disappears from social life is often told by well-meaning friends and concerned family members that they are lonely, that they need more connection, that their withdrawal is a symptom of something that needs to be corrected. And sometimes this is true. Sometimes the withdrawal has gone so deep that even the self is absent from it, and what looks like solitude has actually become a kind of internal isolation, a disconnection not just from others but from one's own aliveness. But sometimes, and I want to say this clearly, sometimes the disappearance is not pathology. Sometimes it is the beginning of something important. Sometimes the person who stops going to the party, who stops performing their social self, who lets the calls go unanswered, not out of depression but out of a growing, quiet, certain sense that they do not need to explain themselves to everyone who knocks, that person is not falling apart. That person is becoming an architect. There is a concept in psychology called the internal locus of evaluation, and it is, I believe, one of the most quietly revolutionary ideas in the entire field of human development. The internal locus of evaluation is the capacity to assess yourself, your choices, your worth, your experience, using your own standards as the primary reference point, rather than the approval or disapproval of the people around you. Most of us, particularly those of us who were shaped by the kind of early experience we have been discussing, develop what you might call an external locus of evaluation instead. We learned that our value was confirmed from the outside, that we were good when we were told we were good, that we were acceptable when we were useful, that our inner experience was secondary to its reception by others. We became, without meaning to, deeply dependent on the feedback of the social world to tell us who we were. And this is why the social world became so exhausting, because when your sense of self is mediated through the mirror of other people's responses, other people stop being just people. They become evidence. Every interaction is data. Every reaction is information about your worth. And that is an unbearable amount of weight to put on something as casual and inconsistent and frankly unreliable as human social response. The shift toward an internal locus of evaluation, the shift that often begins, quietly and almost involuntarily, in the person who starts to withdraw, is not the development of arrogance or indifference. It is the beginning of a self that can stand without being seen, a self that does not require external confirmation to know that it exists, that it matters, that its experience is real. This is not a small thing. This is in fact one of the most significant forms of psychological growth available to a human being. And it often begins not in a therapist's office or in a breakthrough conversation, but in the profound quiet of an ordinary evening alone, when you realize that you feel more like yourself right now in this silence than you have felt in weeks of social performance. That realization is not a symptom, that is a signal. The question that tends to arise here, and it is a fair and necessary question, is this: how do I know if I have gone too far? How do I know if the solitude that feels like peace is actually a wall that I built so long ago that I have forgotten it is a wall? How do I know if the self I have found in the quiet is genuinely mine, or if it is simply the absence of challenge, the shape that is left when everything demanding has been carefully removed? This is the question of the conscious architect versus the unconscious recluse, and the difference between them is not in how much time they spend alone, it is in whether the choice is made from freedom or from fear. The unconscious recluse withdraws because connection is dangerous, because the nervous system cannot tolerate the approach of another person's need, because the architecture of solitude is not a home they have built, but a fortress they have fled into. The solitude of the recluse is defined by what it excludes. It is a solitude made of walls. The conscious architect chooses solitude as a practice. They choose it as the condition under which their best thinking happens, their deepest healing occurs, their most honest relationship with themselves becomes possible, and crucially, they retain the capacity for genuine connection, not performed connection, not functional connection, but the real thing, the ventral vagal, nervous system safe, truly present meeting of two people who are not using each other to regulate anything, but simply choosing to be in each other's company because it is genuinely good. The path from one to the other is not linear, and it is not quick, but it begins with a specific act of permission that I want to offer you now, directly, as the thing I most want you to take from this conversation. You are allowed to stop being the reliable one for a while. You are allowed to not have an answer. You are allowed to miss a call without explaining yourself, to decline an invitation without a reason that will satisfy everyone, to take up the space of your own life without filling it with service to other people's needs. Your worth is not your productivity. Your lovability is not your usefulness. The version of you that exists in the silence, the one that does not perform or manage or hold everything together, that version is not less deserving of care. That version is not less real. In fact, I would argue that version is the most real thing about you. That version has been waiting, patiently, in the quiet spaces between all the obligations and all the performances and all the years of being what everyone needed, waiting for you to come home to it. The disappearance was never the ending. It was the beginning of finding out who you actually are when no one is watching, when nothing is required, when the only voice in the room is yours, and you finally, after all this time, decide to listen to it. You did not disappear. You went looking for yourself, and perhaps, just perhaps, you are starting to find the way back.